And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves.
I think what's important to stress about the mission is that we are not looking for a guilty country or something like that.
Will be, somewhat significant, but perhaps obviously not that level of war or conflict.
And that's why certainly the United States and other countries, we need to do all we can to support the World Health Organization. And as members of the world community, we all are stakeholders in asking some really tough questions about how the pandemic began. And we don't need to just point fingers at China. We need to point fingers at ourselves. China certainly has failed. The United States has failed. The World Health Organization has in many ways failed. We need to be asking these tough questions because for all we know, a worse pandemic is just around the corner, and shame on us if we're not doing all we can to be ready for that.
The vast majority of work on that area will be done for the betterment of mankind. There are always going to be the bad guys around, somewhere, someplace. You would hope that they don't have the opportunity to do something that is going to ultimately hurt mankind.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can only work with parts that you have, right? You don't make new ones. That's exactly right.
That when a U.S. Embassy delegation visited the lab in 2018, they were aghast by the low level of security. And we also know that the Americans who partnered with the WIV and scientists even at the WIV itself aren't able to account for all of the viruses in their database. On top of that, we know that lots of level 4 and other level virology institutes around the world have had security breaches. So I just don't think it would be credible to say that we can rule this out because a few Americans have nice things to say about their Chinese counterparts. China perhaps would have every reason to cover up if this terrible, deadly pandemic resulted from an accidental lab leak, which is bad enough, but followed by a criminal cover-up. I mean, that would be devastating for China, the authority of the Chinese government within China, for the standing of the Chinese government and China in the world. So we should assume that China would have an incentive to cover something like this up. And I'm not saying that we know for certain it's one thing or another. Maybe it could be a zoonotic jump in the wild. It could also very well be an accidental lab leak. But that's why what we need is a full and unrestricted international forensic investigation into the origins of the pandemic with access to everything. And China is not allowing that. And we have to ask why.
As you know, very early on in January, we put the ban on in China, and that was a very early date. That wasn't a late date. That was an early date. Then we later put the ban on in Europe. And if we didn't do that, as Alex knows, we would have had a problem like you wouldn't have believed. We would have had a problem much bigger. But
the public health department in LA straight up said that they didn't have any evidence to support banning the outdoor dining. They just did it anyway. All this is that Californians have given Democrats so much power and control over us that they're just doubling down, tripling down. They're doing it to us, and we're out here and we're saying we're done. We're tired of this. The Democrats don't even follow their own rules. They're going out. They're not even afraid of this virus, but they're telling us that we need to be deathly afraid. No, we're done.
Meanwhile, life in China, where COVID-19 was first detected, is mostly back to normal, with some health restrictions in place. But after strict lockdowns across the country, people here are once again able to go to concerts.
It's taken almost exactly a year, so long in fact that Wuhan, the city where the outbreak began, is back to normal. People aren't packed indoors hiding from the virus. They're now packed in clubs, celebrating their freedom.
On the bright side, the month of March was the first March without a school shooting since 2002, which is great news. Or it's kind of great news. Or it's not like really good news because there's no school shootings because schools are closed because of the corona. No, ha! Can't trick me into saying it. Not going to say it. Nice try, news.
A team of 10 international scientists is to travel to the Chinese city of Wuhan next month to investigate the origins of COVID-19. That's according to the World Health Organization.
until we're stopped by the police, lying in wait for us. This is a system that doesn't care for questions, and it is one that the experts from the World Health Organization must navigate.
WHO's position has been very clear that we will start the study from Wuhan, know what has happened there, and then based on the findings we have there, to explore if there are other avenues that we have to explore. And our position has been very clear and very strong. And we're working to make sure that the origin of the virus is known.
For mainstream Liberal politicians, coronavirus is more evidence that because we are more international and interconnected than ever, the only way to manage global challenges is through deeper global cooperation.
It claims China sat on critical information for 6 full days, from January 14th until January 20th, downplaying the outbreak in public, before finally revealing the full scope of the threat.
Do you envision political or social fallout from suggesting that a Chinese lab is to blame?
I do. That's exactly why it's so important to be careful with that language between the President, the Secretary of State, and Dr. Fauci. They're all saying something similar, but to be very clear, the fallout from a mistake or an accidental release.
I think it's just going to become part of our life.
You praised China in the past, so what's changed? When you tweeted, China's been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. The U.S. greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency. It will all work out well. What has changed between then, when you were saying those things about China, and now?
Well, what's changed is the following. We did a trade deal and everybody was very happy. There's nobody ever been tough on China like I've been tough on China. I got elected, at least partially, because of borders and military and different things. But one of the things I'd say is how China and other countries are ripping us off.
The WHO has tried before to do what China's President Xi Jinping did back in March and go to the streets of Wuhan. An initial team came in July, but they didn't make it beyond quarantine in Beijing. The full 10-person team hopes to gather samples here and interview some of the first known people infected. Much, though, will depend on working with their Chinese counterparts.
In fact, the first genome was submitted on Christmas Eve, 24th of December. That is correct. But the first patients described with the coronavirus symptoms in a medical journal, in the Lancet, in fact, fell ill on the 1st of December. So inevitably, that patient must have caught it in November. And as for the origins of or the theory that the origins of the infection started in the Wuhan fish market, I think is problematic for 2 reasons. First of all, as I said, the most ancient viral subtype is the A type. But what we found is that the dominant type in Wuhan, even in the early phase, in the first 3 weeks, was the B type. 20 out of 23 patients in Wuhan until mid-January have the B type, only 3 of the A type. And elsewhere in China, you find more of these A types. For example, in Yunnan or in Guangdong in southern China, where indeed you have bat populations, whereas in Wuhan you don't.
Dr. Fabian Leendertz from the Robert Koch Institute in Germany is on the team.
And so the big scope is to try to find out what happened, so how the virus jumped from which animal to perhaps an intermediate host and then to humans, to reconstruct this scenario.
Now, the reason the 1918 flu was so deadly, similar to this coronavirus, is humans had no immunity against it.
That's why understanding where the novel coronavirus came from is key to understanding how we got it. One clue might be in those spiky proteins that allow the virus to infect you. And these specific proteins work dangerously well and have never been seen before.
And this is important because this is why every single major scientific journal and authority believes that the virus came from nature and not a lab. And we suspect the 1918 influenza was an avian flu.
The 1918 flu pandemic is believed to have killed 50 million people and infected a third of the global population at the time. Though it was called the Spanish flu, researchers now believe it started in the US, on a pig farm in Kansas. Here's what some experts believe happened. A bird with the flu and a human with a common seasonal flu infected a pig. The two flus mutated in a pig and created a new virus.
While the seafood wholesale market was a hotspot for transmission, so far there is no hard evidence that links an infected animal to the market.
As hundreds of millions traveled leading up to the Lunar New Year holiday, mass gatherings at airports and railway stations, the Wuhan Health Commission maintained that the outbreak was controllable and preventable and that this was not contagious.
What is the latest then with the WHO's investigation into the origins of the pandemic? Is it on hold now?
No, it's not on hold. The team is going to be visiting China later this month.
Mishaps don't happen. But if it were intentionally released, it's not intentionally created, but intentionally released, that would be tantamount to the largest biowarfare we've ever seen on the planet. And so we have to be very careful to make sure we don't imply that unless there's pretty strong evidence.
The AP report is based on what they characterize as a memo from a January 14th confidential teleconference involving the head of China's National Health Commission. CNN has combed through the government's public report of that teleconference, which was released more than a month after it took place. It says a, quote, sober understanding of the situation was made known to top Chinese government officials, adding that, quote, clustered cases suggest that human-to-human transmission is possible.
Why do you think people keep inventing these conspiracy theories, even when scientists are continuously arguing against them?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that the science is hard to understand for most people. When people don't understand the science, then it's easy for them to turn to conspiracy because they can understand a conspiracy, right? And I think the other part of it is that people want to put blame, right, for things that happen. So this is a natural disaster, which is what viruses are. They originate from nature. And many people can't understand that or come to terms with it. So they want to blame someone. So they blame a laboratory.
It was not until January 20th that leading health officials acknowledged publicly cases of human-to-human transmission. And they even stated that medical personnel had gotten infected. CNN spoke with one of the doctors who early on tried to sound the alarm and contracted the illness. Wuhan ophthalmologist Dr. Li Wenliang was reprimanded in early January by Wuhan police. They accused the 34-year-old of spreading rumors after he had messaged friends, warning them of a SARS-like illness going around. Instead of listening to his warning, police silenced Dr. Li and other whistleblowers. He died of coronavirus in early February. CNN's early reporting also highlighted an underreporting of cases. Wuhan residents telling us that their loved ones were never tested, despite suffering from coronavirus-like symptoms. Instead, their deaths listed as severe pneumonia. Whether it was intentional or due to a lack of testing, for some, China's reported numbers of coronavirus cases and deaths does not add up.
Of course, and then of the third driver is political. Of course, we have individuals in the U.S. who have political motives to put blame on another country for this, another laboratory, and that drives them. I mean, it's irrational in my view. You should look at the science, but those are the things I think keep driving these theories, and they never stop.
It needs global scientific cooperation, free flow of information, and coordinated interventions to tackle the health crisis and support the global economy.
That means the scientists will have to work backwards.
So we are starting on the human side, checking if there are stored serum samples, perhaps swabs from symptomatic people from the months before the first known case. So trying then to see where that track leads us, if it's another city or if it stays in Wuhan or where that goes.
I think there are better candidates than Wuhan for the beginning of the epidemic.
The mere fact that we don't know the answers, that China hasn't shared the answers, I think is very, very telling.
Because it helps the world to understand the genesis and prevent future outbreaks.
There will be veterinarians, there will be medical doctors, there will be epidemiologists, there will be virologists who are experts in these viruses. There will be experts in this type of diseases that originate in animals and jump to humans. All together, we will work together with Chinese counterparts on different studies that hopefully will help us better understand this virus.
China has repeatedly maintained that they have been open and forthcoming in their handling of this outbreak. On Wednesday, China's foreign ministry said that in an open, transparent, and responsible manner, China has kept the WHO and relevant countries updated on the outbreak. But if the early cover-up and mishandling at the local level was in fact known by top officials, their delayed action might overshadow the massive containment effort that China so proudly promotes.
Yes, well, the other point which is known is that if you look at the Lancet paper from January, it actually says that the very first patient who fell ill on the 1st December had no contact with the Wuhan fish market. So this looks to me as if the fish market may have been an accelerator, a catalyst, but not necessarily the origin there.
The WHO team will be scouring through hospital records for early cases that their Chinese counterparts might have missed, testing stored blood samples and interviewing the earliest patients. They'll also try to trace animal sources through the market, mapping supply chains and coming up with a strategy to test more animals. Chinese officials say that so far none of the potential host animals they've tested have had the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Right now, the best clue as to where the virus originated was found in 2013, in a cave in China's southwestern Yunnan province. Researchers isolated genetic material from a virus found in a bat in the cave. The genetic sequence would later prove to be 96% similar to SARS-CoV-2. But while it's the closest relative to the COVID-19 virus discovered so far, it's very distant in evolutionary terms. Evolutionary biologist Edward Holmes from the University of Sydney in Australia told the Post that getting to a point of certainty on the source animals means finding a virus that is more than 99% similar across the whole genome. And it's still not certain that the virus originated in China. Genetic evidence collected from a child who was infected with COVID-19 in Italy in December 2019 and from a man in France who tested positive in the same month indicate that the virus was spreading earlier than first thought.
And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves.